Hi, my name is Noah Gift, and I'm going to talk to you today about a subject that's really not talked about a lot in the software industry or the gig industry, which is revenue. And my experience is that I have an MBA from UC Davis. I teach in business school, so I do have some academic background with revenue, but I also was a general manager at a company where I helped generate millions of dollars of revenue from zero with multiple product lines. That really helped me kind of figure out how to make things like MRR, which stands for monthly reoccurring revenue. And in my career since then, I've been a consultant, an author, and I've been really thinking differently about how I approach money. And this isn't advice, financial advice at all. You should see a financial planner or advisor. This is more of just a different way to think about revenue. And a lot of times when I'm talking to students in programs that I teach at, I also have them think about this, which is, what is the color of your money? Is it red money, which I would call salary, which is really something that is in a way kind of dangerous because you're dependent on your place of employment. There's yellow income, which could be consulting income, which is a little bit better in a sense because you could have, let's say, 3 or 4 consulting clients, and if one of them goes away, then you still have another 3. And then there's green money, which is an investment mindset, which if you think about how venture capitalists structure things, right, they've offloaded all the risks to other people, and then they themselves have a whole portfolio of investments where it's going to give revenue at some point in the future. And so as an individual, you can also think this way. You can think about stocks. You can buy stocks that have dividends, and those can give you a form of revenue. You could have subscriptions where maybe you're selling a book, and other people can pay you on a monthly basis for that book through royalties. There's also software as a service companies. A lot of software engineers could build, let's say, an iOS app, or they could build an Android app in the Google Play Store and then get a monthly subscription. You could be an open source developer and you could get an open source subscription. You could also be a landlord, right? You could buy a property, you could rent it out. So there's a lot of passive income that you can generate. And when we're first starting out in our career, I think it's easy to really gravitate just towards that red money focus, which is, hey, I get a big salary, that's great. But if you live in a high cost area and potentially you lose your job, what happens then? You're kind of stuck. And so a very different way is to think more as a computer scientist, where you're designing from failure from the beginning, assuming that everything at some point will fail. Would you architect your system, which is your money system, differently? So that's what we're going to talk about in this next lesson here, and I think it'll be very helpful in maybe thinking about some of the things you can do in the future to improve the way you think about money. Now let's look at an analysis of the different kind of things you could do in your career. I think many people, when you first start out, are interested in a high salary, right? It seems very appealing. For example, let's say you get $200,000 and you can get a job in the Bay Area. That could be an incredibly exciting experience. I think one thing to consider, though, is if you have high monthly expenses, that it's possible you're actually creating a dependency feedback loop where the salary itself really just pays for your monthly expenses. And if there's nothing that's generating equity like property or investments, then essentially you've made yourself very fragile. And then I think this is really an important consideration when you're considering what to do with your career is, are you building things that are fragile and make you more dependent, or are you building things that allow you to have a greater level of autonomy and freedom and creativity? And also, are you designing things like a computer scientist would design something where you're making it designed for failure from the very beginning? And with salary, one of the things that can happen is that your company can lay you off, you can get fired, and then all of a sudden your salary is gone, but your monthly expense is still there. A different approach would be to also think not just in salary, but in consulting, side gigs, and to think about what could you do to maybe shift some of your income. And you could do this while you're having a full-time job, but could you actually build some consulting revenue? So for example, let's say your salary is $10,000 per month. What if you're able to get one consulting client that would pay you $1,000 per month, presumably in the same thing you're doing? Maybe you're doing mobile development, or you're doing product management, or you're doing sales. Now, what's nice about this is you're shifting more towards this autonomy level. And if you're able to take that 1K and potentially put it into a resource like, let's say, an index fund or a house, or maybe an investment into some other company, you're starting to build this full autonomous system here that can pay you while you're sleeping. And the better approach, though, with consulting is to not just think about one client, just like with, if you're building software systems and you're only building one server somewhere, that eventually it will fail. Is what if you had 4 clients and each of those clients paid you 1,000, right? You would have 1K here, 1K here, 1K here, and none of them would really be somebody that you would be dependent on. And again, because the idea here is to go towards autonomy, where you're actually not asking for permission to be successful. You're choosing to be successful because you've built a system where you still get paid regardless of whether the person you're working with likes you or whether they have money, because you've designed your system for failure. And this is really the ideal consulting path. If someone wanted to go into consulting, is I would call this the rule of 25%, where you don't ever have a consulting client that gives you more than 25% of your income. And the reason for this is then you're essentially still a salaried worker at that point. If you're doing consulting and you have one client, you're basically a salaried worker without benefits. But a dream scenario, maybe initially as well, would be as you're deciding to maybe work for yourself or choose to build other income sources, you could have 4 clients, each one of them not contributing more than 25%, and even telling them not to give you more work because you want to spend that extra time building more consulting clients, which make you less fragile, or you're going to spend that time working on things that pay you off, investments in the future. So what are some examples of shifting towards this green section here? So you could create products. This is what startups do. They build products that generate monthly reoccurring revenue. And an individual can do the same thing. You can build apps, you can write books, you can generate software as a service products, you could rent out a house, you could get dividends and stocks. Essentially, the idea with doing investments is that you're building up MRR. And let's say, again, your salary was 10K. What if you could get an MRR of combined 10K? Well, at that point, especially if these things are distributed, just like the rule of 25%, and you have a wide variety of different kinds of investments, it's possible, if you choose to, you could not have a job anymore, and you could be building more and more investments, and you're essentially giving yourself more freedom, more autonomy, making yourself less anti-fragile, and you could choose to do consulting when it pops up. So this would become more of like an opportunistic scenario where, if something comes up and someone pays you some good money to work on something, that's great, but you don't need it. And so you're able to get a higher consulting rate because all of your income is coming from this green money. So I think this is really not talked about enough when you're starting your career off, or if you're looking to do a career shift, is, what color is the money that you're generating? And also, are your expenses so high that even if you are earning, let's say, $800,000 a year, in some scenarios, that actually could all go to, let's say, a $10,000 a month Palo Alto rental and a Tesla that you're on a lease, and then basically you're essentially going nowhere because you're not building up the ability to have investments or to do consulting and making yourself anti-fragile. So in my opinion, whether it's a company, when I've worked with startups, or whether it's an individual, it's really important to think about the diversity of your income sources and to be able to survive when the inevitable will happen, which is, there's a personnel change or someone is thinking about, maybe getting a different position or a different client, it doesn't matter to you because you've already designed your system to account for that, just like a software system would do. And eventually you head towards this investment goal where most of what you're working on is green money, where you could take the summer off or you could take a year off. It doesn't matter. You still have money that's coming in. And this is really the investment mindset. So just like that other concept of red money, yellow money, green money, one is potentially more autonomous and one is more dependent. Another way of thinking about the same problem is a money lake. So in a typical scenario, again, if you have high salary, high expenses, actually you have money coming in, but it's immediately going back out. There's a stream that's kind of sucking the lake dry and there's no money inside the lake. But in the more of a green money mindset, where you're building products, you're building investments, you're building properties, you're building things that go into a pool. Essentially, this MRR, each stream makes a pool of money larger and larger and larger. So it could be an index fund, it could be a savings account, it could be a property. It doesn't matter what it is, but you're able to build more security and more autonomy. The more you're able to put different things inside of a different MRR stream. So this again applies to not just an individual. This also applies to an organization. If you're building a company from scratch and you have a large pool of funds, then it gives you the ability to try new things, hire new people. And I think this is an important concept when you're thinking about MRR. The goal isn't just that you're trying to, by itself, attain autonomy or generate revenue, but it gives you the flexibility to do other things, and to have creativity, to not have to take every consulting job that comes around. And it really is a path towards autonomy. In this lesson, I talked about something that's not talked about a lot when you're starting your career off, or if you're shifting into a new direction, you're maybe 30, 40, 50, you want to go into a new direction in your career. And it's really this concept of autonomy. How can you build a lifestyle where you're able to choose to be successful versus asking permission to be successful? That's really what I think about when I think about things like monthly reoccurring revenue, or having quote unquote green money, is that it gives me the ability to choose the things that I want to do. And I think it's an important concept when you're considering what location to live in, and what expenses to incur, and then also what kind of a salaried position. And that eventually, not everyone necessarily needs to do this, but if you do want to lead a life where you have a lot of autonomy, then one way to do it is to be thoughtful about this red, yellow, green concept, and to build more and more towards this yellow and anti-fragile way of generating money, maybe eventually getting into this green scenario where you can choose to work on something. So for example, another scenario, I think that's an interesting scenario, is if, let's say, you are able to completely replace your income with investments, right? You have index funds and rentals and books and products and things like this. You also could go back to a company and choose to work there, but it's a very different relationship because you don't need to have a job, you want to have a job, and maybe it's a job that you're really passionate about and you want to do something that's fulfilling in life. So I think it is important to think about the different styles of money and the different things that come with that when you're choosing your career.